So I read Driving the Green Book by Alvin Hall, and it was published February 21st of 2023. Alvin Hall was an American author, financial educator, and like a media personality, and he's best known for his work in financial literacy and Black history. He's written several books on personal finance, and he has a radio and television program, and he's also been on BBC. And he's recognized for his work in documenting his book, Driving the Green Book, and he focuses on like historical experiences of Black Americans, social justice, and economic empowerment. And he is 72 years old as of today. Alright, so the summary of the book is Driving the Green Book is a blend. It's like a history, memoir, and like a travel journal that explores the significance of the Negro Motorist Green Book, and that is, in essence, a travel guide that was published every year from 1936 to 1967. And what it did is it helped Black travelers navigate the dangers of segregation in the United States. And in the book, Hall and a few other people retrace the routes used by Black Americans, like using the book. And along the way, he met people who lived through that era, and he learned how they used the Green Book to find safe lodging, safe restaurants, and other like amenities and services along their route. So that was cool. And through personal stories and historical research, Hall tries to shed like light of the triumphs, but also the challenges that Black travelers had during the Jim Crow era, and later on, all throughout until I think up to 1967, when the last edition was published of the Green Book. So 2 important passages that I thought I'd read to you guys. I'll start with the first one now. All right, in quotes. That's quite wrong. Sundown towns existed throughout the United States, and there were actually more in the North than the South. By the end of the 1960s, as many as 10,000 towns across the country were effectively off limits to Blacks, and that was on page 64. So this quote comes directly after a misconception that Hall identifies, where a lot of people think that sundown towns are only in the North in the United States, and this is incorrect. And he says that because restrictive like Black codes and Jim Crow laws were enacted after Reconstruction, like prominently in the South, so people are led to believe that there's more sundown towns in the South, but this is incorrect. And he cites that cities in California, in New York, and in Michigan that at least had a population of 60,000 at the time of the Green Book were sundown towns. And the sheer amount of segregation and prejudice felt in the entire nation during this era makes it more obvious why the Black community during the time needed the Green Book to be able to safely navigate their country. One comment I put is, when there are signs put up with racial slurs telling Black Americans that they are not welcome in certain towns, a solution in avoiding these places was very necessary. And that is why the Green Book was created. Another passage I'd like to read for you comes earlier in the book. And it goes, the car gave millions of Black Americans the possibility of exploring the wide open spaces of our country, just as many white Americans had always done. And this quote and the surrounding passage are very eye-opening to me, because something that I myself take for granted is like safe travels across the country, and that hasn't always been a thing for Black Americans. And I've been very lucky in my lifetime to travel all across the United States and also internationally. And it's so crazy to me that before the automobile, Black Americans didn't have the accessibility or the outreach to be able to see the country that I have. And the passage highlights the good of the automobile and the good of this, but also the fact that along the way, throughout the U.S., segregation and limits were set on Black Americans, and they weren't even allowed to go to certain hotels, restaurants, golf courses, pools along their route. So even though they had the ability to travel the country, they couldn't really go to every place they wanted to, which is another reason that the Green Book was necessary. And It is cited in the book by Alvin Hall that there was a survey that not more than 6% of the nation's black hotels, of the nation's better hotels and motels, welcomed black travelers. So that's really crazy that at the time of the first edition it was published, only less than 6% of lodging was accessible to black people during the time, which is why they needed to know where they were allowed to be, but like places that would service them. But it's not all bad. Hall also touches on the strong camaraderie and all the fun that black travelers were still able to have in the face of this such outrageous treatment. And they still, a lot of them, as cited in the book, still had a really good attitude and positive mentality because they were still traveling their country, just maybe not on the terms they would like. And they had this camaraderie in spite of like the harsh negative treatment they received along their journey. And I think that's really admirable and respectable that they were able to keep up this mentality. So I really enjoyed this book. Maybe not for everybody. Some people might think it's a little slow, and there's so many anecdotes from different people they meet along the way, and very niche parts of it, like how the automobile affected it. He goes into detail about how different cities, Detroit specifically, was a place where black Americans kind of like went to look for a better life because of their the Ford Motor Company and all the jobs that were available because of like the manufacturing of cars there, and how black Americans faced racism and segregation like in these factories, in these manufacturing plants, and like even getting their own wages, they weren't even paid the same amount. So there's very small nuances and like niche topics that it goes into, but if you want to learn more about this time period in our country's era, in our country's history, I would recommend this book. It's kind of long, but I think we could all learn a lot from this book, as it just shows up how we need to be better to each other and how something like this just can't happen in the future. So that was Driving the Green Book by Alvin Hall.